Well, it's arguably the most famous parable in the New Testament, the parable of the Good Samaritan. So much so that the phrase Good Samaritan is just a part of the English language, whether or not you're a Christian. Everyone knows what it means without explaining it. And in this particular case, what we're going to do, I think there's a very unconventional look at this from the Gospel Coalition. And I want to get to that here in just a moment. But I'm going to have Lauren share the story with us so we can all kind of be in our frame of mind of this famous story.
Luke 10, starting in chapter 29. Verse 29. The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and he saw the man. He felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If the bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time that I'm here." Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Then Jesus said, "Yes, now go and do the same."
Such a great story. And again, the context in this would be someone said, "What's the greatest commandment?" Jesus said, "Love God, love your neighbor." Somebody else said, "Well, who's my neighbor?" And the guy was not going like, "I can't wait to love my neighbor. Please tell me who it is."
Right.
He was hoping for a narrowed down list.
Yeah.
Because that's a tall order.
My family, my friends,
Right.
you.
Your literal proximity neighbor.
Yeah.
The one next door and behind you. So what are some of the things you all have heard about this story when you have heard sermons or done your own Bible study? What do you know about it? What stands out to you?
Well, one is the people who should have been most likely to offer help didn't. They stayed away. And the one of the 3 there, the one least likely to offer help was the one who did. And he's the Samaritan, racially, ethnically, they were looked down upon by the Jews, like a second-class citizens. So it was even more like a slap in the face of, hey, all you Jews listening to me, you wouldn't even have done this, but look, a Samaritan did it.
Yeah, good. I've heard that one too.
I've heard to examine ourselves as the priest or the temple assistant, and we're the ones that are passing people by that we shouldn't be.
Because we want to naturally make ourselves the hero in every Bible story.
Right.
We've all
Of
done it.
course.
I do it all the time where it's like, oh boy, yeah, I'm the Samaritan. I would have helped that guy. No way. How many times have I passed by someone who needs help?
Right.
And I've come up with a good reason to not stop. Yeah, that's good. Daria, you heard anything that stands out?
Yeah, I think what we miss, to Ron's point, in our culture is just how offensive this story would have been to the Jewish people. I mean, they hated the Samaritans. There was a lot of animosity, and Jesus is going, well, this person can help. But it's just, it calls us to reflect on ourselves and see who is like the Samaritans in our lives that we just kind of turn our noses up at.
And I think it's even hard in our modern context to do that because racism is so frowned upon in our society. But maybe if you go back in the 1980s, right, the 60s to the 80s, the Samaritan would be, in an American context, a Russian.
It doesn't have to be
A
like
commie.
like racism or a whole people group. There's like, I think we all have certain groups in our minds that we other and we think of as less than. Like, we're in the middle of an election season. You might say, oh, like for you, it might be a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I think in our modern society right now, it would be that the other side of the aisle. They're the one that helped him, not you and your group. Now, there's so many different sermons that can come out of this because it's so packed with meaning from Jesus. But there's something shared in this Gospel Coalition article by Matt Martins that it gave me a fresh look at it. So let's take a look at a few things. First of all, the lawyer asked Jesus, "Who's my neighbor?" Right? And Jesus responded in a way that did not answer the question, in a sense. In effect, Jesus answered the question, who acted as a neighbor? And he goes on to say, the Danish theologian Soren Kierkegaard observed, Christ does not talk about knowing one's neighbor, but about oneself being a neighbor and about providing oneself a neighbor. Jesus didn't say, all right, here's the list. He said, you be a neighbor. Don't worry about who the neighbor is. You act like one, okay? Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, neighborliness is not a quality in other people. It's simply their claim on ourselves. Bonhoeffer, so good. Again, neighborliness is not a quality in other people. It is simply their claim on ourselves. So here's where it starts to get difficult to hear. As we see in Jesus' parable, when we're in a position to help, it's no answer to say we played no role in causing the wrong that gives rise to the need. To narrow the obligation to love based on our role, or lack thereof, in the injustice is to play the lawyer, circumscribing the boundaries of the neighborhood of affection. Neighborly love isn't love of culpability, but a love of compassion. Whether or not we're responsible for committing the wrong doesn't determine whether we're responsible for remedying it. To really narrow this down, he says, Christ suggests our obligation to love means we must fix messes we didn't cause and cure injustices for which we weren't responsible. Christian love is proactive, affirmative, and interventionist. Christian love jumps to help. But this is where our modern society will be very uncomfortable. First of all, how do we feel about this? Again, he says, Christ suggests our obligation to love means we must fix messes we didn't cause and cure injustices for which we're not responsible.
It's a little uncomfortable. It's very counterintuitive to our American pull yourself up by your bootstraps and, American dream and isolationism and all that. But we're supposed to live in community and help each other and love one another and beyond just reconciliation for things that we have done.
Yeah, it runs very counter to much, as you're saying, of American thinking, right? I don't know how many times I've heard over the years, we've tried to talk about issues of racial injustice on the show and racism in America. And every single time we talk about it, somebody says, well, I didn't do that. Either I'm not racist or my family wasn't slave owners, so it's not my problem. Get over it. That is every single time. And yet, according to this interpretation at least, it says that as Christians, part of loving your neighbor is to fix injustices for which we aren't responsible. Is that a fair interpretation of the text, do we think?
Yeah, the Samaritan didn't beat him up.
And we don't even know what the guy did. Jesus is very deliberate about not even, you're just saying he got robbed. Was it his fault? Was he being careless?
He was on a dangerous road, I think, is how it's interpreted. Like this was a known place where bandits were going to be present.
Well, we don't know whether it was his own foolishness that caused it. Was he going at night?
Matter.
He should have. Well, of course it doesn't matter. And that's why I'm bringing that up. Right. It doesn't matter. And this Samaritan, it's like it wasn't his fault. He didn't have anything to do with it. He didn't have any obligation to do anything about it, and it wasn't his fault that it happened. But he still stepped in and did something about it. This is a very uncomfortable neighborly love. So I don't know I don't know that I can say I know what that looks like in a modern context, how to live this out. But I would say a fair interpretation of the story, and push back if you think I'm wrong on this, would be that we are, as Christians, responsible to fix injustices we didn't cause. If we see an injustice in society, we don't get a pass if we didn't cause it. We have some measure of obligation to care and or do something about it.
Well, if we're supposed to look like Jesus, he didn't cause us to sin, but he came and fixed that.
True point.
Moody grad, there you go. That's profound. It's profound, Lauren. That's great. And it's true. It's uncomfortable because it means we have to care more. Now, I know what somebody would go, well, I can't care about everything, Brian, because I've had that problem. People go, Brian, you don't only buy hamburger that's ethically raised? Like, there are corners in which I can't do something about everything. But there's a measure at which I do need to be aware of that problem, right? of all issues, and I need to have a response to it in some measure, care in some way.
I think that's why there's like a multitude of people, that we all have different things that we care about and we worry about and we work towards justice for. We can't all do everything for everybody.
But I think we'd still have an obligation, I agree with you, to, at least in discussion, reflect Christian character in it. Like,
Yes.
I could go, I probably should only purchase meat that's ethically raised.
Sure.
Because God created animals, and I shouldn't allow them to be tortured for my own benefit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm picking a random thing.
Right.
I don't care that much about that, but I care enough. I feel like I have to have a Christian response. Therefore, I can't say, if somebody is really upset about race issues in America or American history, I can't say, well, not my problem. I didn't cause that. I think we ought to just get over it. I don't think that's a Christian response.
And even if you don't understand, at least acknowledge that your brother or sister is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and oddly enough, I've had a significant problem in my ministry life convincing people of my ethical or ethnic persuasion to agree with that statement. It's crazy. It's true, though. Something to consider. I want to chew on this maybe more on Friday, but let me again leave you with this quote from the Gospel Coalition. Christ suggests our obligation to love means we must fix messes we didn't cause and cure injustices for which we weren't responsible.